The Regent's Reign, Chapter 10, Introductions. Gaius had always been a bit intimidating. He had an air about him that proclaimed he would deal with no nonsense. He was one of the only people living who could curb Merlin's tongue on a semi-reliable basis. He was also one of the most reliable advisors Arthur had, and was the only living member of Merlin's family that they knew of. Arthur suspected Merlin's father had been a magic user fleeing from Camelot and the Purge, but he had yet to gather the courage to dig into that possibility. Arthur took a deep breath and knocked on the physician's quarters. He knew Merlin was busy. She had a fitting with the royal seamstress for the dress she would be wearing for Gwen and Lancelot's wedding. She had protested, but Arthur was insistent that everyone should look their best for it. He was footing the bill for Gwen's dress as well. It was the least he could do. "It's open," Gaius called. Arthur steeled his nerves. He'd faced down dragons and griffins. It should not be that hard to face an old physician. "Ah, sire. How can I help you?"
"I need to ask you something, Gaius,"
Arthur said, and Gaius raised an eyebrow.
"By now, I'm sure you are aware that I hold your niece in the highest esteem. She has been the only thing that held me together so often. She has pushed me to be a better man. I love her. I have never loved anyone the way I love her. I don't know that I knew what that word meant before her."
Arthur cleared his throat.
"All that to say, I would ask your permission as her last living relative to court your niece. Please?"
"If anyone in Camelot is unaware of how you feel for my niece, then I fear they have been struck blind,"
Gaius said, and Arthur nodded. That was not a point he could argue.
"I do wish to ask what your intentions are, though I know you to be a noble man."
"When I am king, whenever that is, if she will have me, I would make her my queen. If she asked it of me, I would give her the world, the sun, the stars. Whatever she wished, I would find a way."
Arthur glanced at the door that he'd closed behind him.
"I know there is a chance that she was born to the last of some lineage wiped out by the Purge. I don't care. I want her safe and happy all her days. I hope to be beside her for all of it,"
he said, and Gaius nodded.
"As pleased as I am to hear this. Does she know all of that?"
Gaius asked.
"She will always make her own choice, and I believe you are what she will choose every time, no matter what. She needs to know she is your first choice."
"If she doesn't know it by now, I will spend every day ensuring that she will always know she is my first choice."
Arthur said, and Gaius nodded.
"Then you have my permission to court my niece,"
Gaius said with a slight smile. Arthur grinned back, feeling as though a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. Merlin was a little nervous. She'd never met Arthur's uncle. Family meant everything to Arthur. The little family they had built was everything to him. She knew that. Hell, half of Camelot knew that. There were whispered comparisons to the court Uther had once built for himself. People seemed to have stopped minding that the grand majority of the people Arthur now surrounded himself with had been peasants and commoners. Agravain came with only a few guards. The banner he rode under was similar to the one now hanging over Arthur's mantle. The largest difference was that someone had added crossed spears behind the dove in flight. Arthur smiled as the man at the front of the party dismounted. He was tall, but didn't look much like his sister. Merlin had only seen Igraine once, when Morgause summoned her spirit to speak to Arthur. She had been a small woman with the same blonde hair and blue eyes as her son, the same kindness in her soul. This man was tall, taller by nearly a head than Arthur himself, but not quite as tall as Percival. He was a thick-set man with dark hair. He might once have been a warrior, but he had clearly gone to seed at least a little.
Uncle,
Arthur called to him, and he smiled, bowing before walking up to grasp Arthur's arm warmly.
Arthur, look how you've grown. You look so much like your mother,
he said, a fond gleam in his eyes.
You are kind to say so, Uncle. My knights,
Arthur said, and began the introductions. Merlin was standing next to Gaius, since Agravain needed to be introduced to the whole council. But she was a bit surprised when Agravain smiled at her and spoke before Arthur could.
This must be Gaius's apprentice, Merlin, isn't it? Tales of your loveliness do you little credit, my lady,
Agravain said, inclining his head to her. She went bright red. Arthur cleared his throat.
And where did you hear such tales, uncle?
He asked, and Agravain smiled.
Princess Elena and her father stayed with me on their way back to Gaunt from their last visit to Camelot. She was quite taken with Camelot and seemed most enamored with Merlin as well,
he said, nodding to Merlin again. Arthur reached out and took Merlin's hand, making her blush reach her ears.
She's not the only one. Merlin and I are courting, uncle,
Arthur announced, and Agravain blinked, then bowed.
That is wonderful news, Arthur. I could not be happier for you. I do take it the upcoming nuptials are not yours, though,
he asked, and Arthur shook his head.
No, one of my knights, Sir Lancelot,
he said. Arthur kissed the back of Merlin's hand and headed into the castle with the rest of the council.
You're hardly an apprentice anymore,
Gaius said, shaking his head. Merlin laughed as she directed a few servants to the rooms they'd prepared for Arthur's uncle.